There have only ever been two. The rule of two. Master and apprentice. This is the natural order and has been for centuries. A decision made to ensure our survival, to ensure our growth, to see us as the single most powerful force in the galaxy. The Jedi could not see this, and this is why they have fallen over and over and over, either from within, from a force they could not handle. I have waited for centuries, watching their fall, seeing how our own have continued to rise and fall as well, waiting for my moment, and now it has come. 40 years ago, he came to me, paranoid, fearful. I knew of Sidious, of course. I could sense him. A stain on the galaxy. He brought me here to oversee a precaution in case he fell. 40 years I have waited. I sent a puppet, a worshipper, to build a new order. My order. And when even he fell, not to a Jedi, but to two Sith, I knew it was time. Two powerful Sith, a dyad, a bond so powerful it tears the Force apart around them. I called you here to help you, to see the Sith rise again. You ask who I am, what I am, but you already know. The Sith would not exist without me. I am the monster in the dark, the fear of any Jedi who knows our history. The ghost of the past, burning fury, bane.
Welcome to part 3 in my sequel trilogy rewrite. Now, the previous 2 rewrites have been pretty ambitious, trying to fix the problems created by Disney's atrocious sequel trilogy, and this one by far is going to have a lot of the biggest changes, primarily the antagonist. Now, if you didn't get by my little intro, you'll see pretty soon enough who this antagonist is. And I'm just going to start off right into it with the title crawl, and then I'll start diving into the details of the plot and how things are going to go from then onwards. So here's our title crawl. Loss, tragedy, pain, and a glimmer of hope. The New Republic reels from the loss of a legendary hero, Luke Skywalker. Forced to retreat to the mysterious Jedi archives of Ahch-To, the Republic army is on the brink, desperate for hope. Led by the fearless Leia Organa, they train under an unlikely hero, growing their forces once more for one final battle. A cold voice calls out across the galaxy, only heard by a select few. It calls for the new leader of the First Order, Darth Mordred, and his newest ally, a Jedi trainee tainted by the Sith, and an even darker bloodline, Rey, to travel to a lost planet, one long since abandoned by the Empire, Exegol. An ancient evil is about to be unleashed onto the galaxy once more, a force user stronger than anything the Jedi have seen for centuries, a creature of pure darkness, pure hatred, a bane on everything good and hopeful. So, as we jump into this, right off the bat, Leia isn't dead. She's not going to die in this movie either. She's going to survive. It's quite cool. And of course, Palpatine is no longer our villain and is replaced by Darth Bane. Now, canonically, Darth Bane isn't on Exegol, but I've moved him to Exegol for the purpose of this story. I'll explain how that happened as we get into it. So right off the bat, we're going to start seeing more of the First Order. It's continuing to grow its forces, getting more support. Rey and Ben are the ones who heard this strange call at the end of the last movie, And we're also going to start seeing their relationship develop a bit more, a romantic relationship between the two. I'm going to keep the fact that they're a dyad in the Force into the story because I think it does fit, and we can still make it work even if they're both Sith, not just one Sith, one Jedi. So in this, Exegol is on the Empire's records as an abandoned planet that has no useful resources, so it was never gone to by the Empire, at least not officially. Rey and Ben travel to Exegol and find an old temple, along with the sound of loud machinery all around. They enter the temple and they're met by this fiery, ghost-like figure. And from there, I jump back to the good guys. Finn would be training on Ahch-To, obviously under Leia's tutelage now, learning more about the Force, the calmer, more pacifist side of the Force compared to Luke's fighting and that sort of thing. And not like Luke was a warmonger, but their training methods would be very different, and Finn's getting the benefit of learning from them both. We see that more Force-sensitive people are joining the New Republic's army, untrained Force users, so they're learning as well, using lightsabers and that sort of thing. I'd probably explain lightsabers being accessed by them as them being kept at the archives. And maybe they're your older forms of lightsabers, they're not your regular lightsabers. So these are very amateur Jedi. While meditating during this training, Finn has a vision of Darth Bane. Doesn't know quite who he is yet, but he does see this dark Sith creature in a way. Back on Exegol, we're finally introduced to Bane. He would give the speech that you heard in the beginning, and he would explain who he is. He would tell them that the Emperor moved his tomb, which is the item that houses his spirit, because the Sith don't have Force ghosts like Jedi do. Instead, they can live on by having their spirit tied to an object or a place. In this case, his spirit was tied to his tomb, and the Emperor moved it to Exegol. Exegol is a planet that's very strong in the dark side, and the Emperor had a secret project there. Basically a backup precaution that he never got the chance to use because it wasn't complete yet, by the time of his death at least. And this is a droid army, because the Emperor finally had a use for droids, you know. They would be able to utilize the Force through Darth Bane because he's such a strong Force user even in death. They're intelligent, they're strong, they're not as big in number, but they're loyal to Bane. We find out that Snoke was a loyalist, maybe a cultist that worshipped Bane, and he was sent by Bane to grow the First Order, build them up as a force in the galaxy. We would find out that this group of these droids, this army, is now called the Final Order, and Bane would lie and say that he did all of this just to find powerful Sith to rule alongside him. It's quite clearly a lie, and he offers his fleet, the Final Order, to Ben and Rey if they can wipe out the last of the Jedi. We'll make it very clear off the bat that Ben and Rey don't trust Bane. Even a Sith, they can sense something's wrong here. Ben would start to feel strange after leaving Exegol, at least return to their ship. He'd feel as if his mind is being influenced by Bane, and this will pay off later on. We'd see a bit more of them on the ship. They romantically care about each other, and they both come to this mutual decision to learn more about their new ally first, learn more about Bane, and they're going to head to the planet where his tomb originally was, which is Moraband. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, sorry. So we jump back to Finn. He'd speak to Leia about his visions, and she knows the power of Force visions, so she'd tell him to search through the archives on this planet for info. Now, these archives are old, but they would definitely have information about Darth Bane. He's 1,000 years old at this point. He would go there, he'd learn who this is, who Darth Bane is, and find out where his tomb is located. Deciding to head there, he'd speak to Leia, and Leia would let him take Chewbacca, the Millennium Falcon, and a pilot, which in this case would be Lando Calrissian. This is a good way to tie him into the plot, but he wouldn't be a major player. Finn would travel to Moraband with them, and they would discover this empty tomb. Just the building, his coffin and his body, and that's not there. While they're investigating, Rey and Ben would also arrive with the First Order, and confront Finn. Finn warns Rey about Bane, because it would have been in the archives how powerful he is, how dangerous he is, and he would try and convince her back to the light. This time we'd see some proper conflict mentally for Rey. She'd be very conflicted. She doesn't trust Bane either. And Ben secretly is also conflicted by this. He's not sure what their path to the future is going to be. It would come down to a fight though, and Finn would have to fight both of them. Maybe Lando and Chewie would do some sort of distraction and Finn would be able to escape this fight, but Chewie would be captured by the First Order. Here's where Lando would come in handy. He'd say he has some sort of contact in the Order that could help them. It would just be a minor mole. Wouldn't be Hux, because I don't see how him being a mole is anything good. I mean, he's a major genocider. He killed billions of people with Starkiller Base. I wouldn't want him to be the mole. It would just be a random person. Maybe an NPC we'd seen earlier in the movies, you know? And this mole would help them get aboard the flagship. They'd be able to save Chewie, but the mole would be killed in the process. While they're on the ship, Finn would find out that the First Order is now using Exegol as their new base. Again, in this Exegol isn't some hidden planet, it's just abandoned by the Empire. Rey and Kylo are going to the ruins of the second Death Star, which is also something that Finn overhears. He follows them and tells Lando and Chewie to head back to Leia to prepare for an attack on Exegol, to catch the First Order by surprise and hopefully deal out a killing blow to their army. Because their army is still not the most powerful thing in the galaxy. They were just relying on their sneak attacks. So while this is happening, Ben and Rey would travel to the Death Star. You'll notice I'm calling him Ben now more than Darth Mordred, because I feel like Ben's just easier to differentiate. But anyway, we find out that Ben wants to find a powerful item on this second Death Star, the Emperor's lightsaber, something that was never retrieved after he was killed, and he's hoping to find it there. Just as a final precaution against Bane, having that along with Vader's saber, it could make them really powerful. Ben does hide that he's starting to hallucinate. He's seeing Darth Bane everywhere, even while he's talking to Rey. And again, this is just showing that Bane's having more and more influence on Ben. So they would get to the Death Star and search it. Ben would eventually find the saber. Maybe he'd have some visions of Palpatine, something like that. And at some point on the second Death Star, Rey would be visited by Luke's Force Ghost. She seriously starts to regret her actions after speaking with him for a bit. And when they're back on the ship, Rey would speak with Ben. They decide that now's the time to go through the archives on the second Death Star, whatever they can access, and to find out more about Bane. Through this, they find out that Bane is a very strong Force user, and if he can find a strong enough Force user, he could possess them to return to life. Ben, obviously hearing this, is furious because he knows that now Bane is just using them, and he decides they should destroy Bane on Exegol. Screw doing what he wants. They're going to destroy him, take his final Order fleet for themselves, and then fight the Republic. And they leave the second Death Star for Exegol. While this is happening, Finn would overhear all of this and find out that Bane is on Exegol and active. Finn would watch them leave and decide on his own that it's time to head to Exegol for this major confrontation. He would doubt his skills and maybe he'd be visited by a couple Force Ghosts of his own, Luke and Yoda primarily. They would tell him he has the strength to prevail because he is still a Jedi, even though he's a Stormtrooper. And we'd come to Exegol for this big battle. The New Republic army has arrived and is fighting the Final Order along with the First Order, and they're doing quite a bit of damage. Finn goes to the surface and meets up with Rey and Ben. They're confrontational at first, but he's able to convince them to work together to destroy Bane. Everyone can agree that this is a much bigger threat, and they decide to confront this ancient Sith Lord. As this happens, Bane would laugh and Ben would grab his head in pain. Then we'd cut to a bit of the sky battle. Maybe we'd show Leia's leadership, give Holdo a bit of screen time as a proper general, and same with Lando and Chewie, have them fighting troops and that sort of thing. We'd meet the Force droids, who are strong, but there are more of the New Republic army, and they start to ignite lightsabers, pushing against the droids, using the Force, and starting to win. Because remember, these things haven't been trained in combat against Jedi. They've never had the chance to fight them, and they'd start winning. Back on the ground, Ben would become possessed by Bane, and Bane would finally be back into the living world, speaking through Ben. Bane would fight Rey and Finn, and it would be a struggle, but during the struggle, Finn fights with his blue lightsaber, and Rey would use Vader and Palpatine's lightsabers. A bit of dual wielding. We'd play off of the fact that the voices of all the Jedi empower them. They can hear their Force ghosts. It's like they're fighting with them. And they start to get the pushback against Bane. You know, Bane hasn't inhabited a body in a long time, so they start to beat him. Rey's able to reach out to Ben using their romantic connection to break through to him. And for a brief moment, Ben would gain control. Before he's even able to say anything, Rey would deal the killing blow, impaling him with the two lightsabers and destroying Bane's spirit. Maybe you'd have a dramatic scene of his coffin exploding with the power of the Force, you know? After this happens, the Force droids that are fighting the New Republic army would lose their ability with the Force and start to form much easier, and the New Republic would pretty much win. Back on the ground, Rey would break down, holding Ben as he dies. Finn would come to her and tell her that she can join the Republic. You know, she can redeem herself. But at this point, she believes that she's too far gone. She's done too much. And she can feel the corruption of the dark side all around her, especially on Exegol. She decides that in order to atone and make her own way, she'll exile herself and she's going to leave. Her last act is to hand Finn Luke's lightsaber because she feels like he deserves to have it. After this big battle, Ben would be buried next to Han. It could be on Coruscant or whichever planet you like, maybe like Alderaan, one of them. Finn would leave the funeral and travel to Tatooine, burying Luke's lightsaber, as Rey did in the original movie. He'd eventually be joined by Leia and would speak to her about the Jedi, knowing that now they need to restart the Jedi Order, and he feels like he's not worthy to be a Jedi Knight. He's just a nameless stormtrooper. Plays on the fact that Finn isn't even his name, it's just a shortening of his, production code, you know? And at this point, Leia would say that he could take on the Skywalker name, since he was trained by Luke and Leia, and Luke would have no problem with him taking it. He would smile and accept it, vowing to rebuild the Jedi Order in Luke's name. I feel like this fits a lot better than Rey taking his name, because Finn's a nameless soldier. He deserves this sort of assurance that he is a Jedi, and he is the new face of the Jedi. It would work. Maybe we'd have a dramatic scene right at the end where he takes off his helmet and finally discards it, if he didn't unmask earlier in this movie. I wanted to keep him masked as long as possible to emphasize the fact that he is just a nameless guy, but eventually he grows into his own character. Our final scene would be of Rey fleeing into the galaxy, well, not fleeing, but flying into the galaxy, maybe with Ben's ship. She would have the Emperor's and Vader's lightsabers with her, showing that she is still on the dark side, but she's making her own path. And this would basically be the final shot, leaving a lot of space open for a sequel. What's happening with Rey? How's she going to redeem herself? What's going to happen with Finn and the new Jedi Order? So there's a lot you could do. And yeah, that's how I'd end this movie. It's not as in-depth as The Last Jedi. That movie had a lot more problems, and this one definitely did, especially with Palpatine somehow returning. I feel like even though Darth Bane returning isn't perfect, it's something the fans would have loved, and it's a little bit out there. I'm curious if you watched my previous two videos. Did you guess that Darth Bane would be the villain? Or who else did you think it would be? I would love to see different concepts of other villains that this final story could have centered around. You know, maybe we'd see the return of something more primordial, like the brother, or something like, I think it's the son, not the brother. I always forget. But yeah, I think it would be a much better version of the story than the movies. And with this, I'm ending my sequel trilogy rewrite. May not be perfect, but I think it's a very low bar to write something better than the sequel trilogy, especially with how messy the storyline is and how much it could have been improved. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. If there's anything you would have changed, leave a comment, leave a like, and please make sure to subscribe if you really enjoyed my video. I'm hoping to put out more videos soon, and I will put a post up on my channel about the next like 6 or 7 planned videos. But for now, I haven't quite thought of them yet. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.